right, guys, welcome back to Biology Scope. We are going to be getting into biogeochemical cycles today. And this is just something absolutely insane that I want you guys to be thinking about as we go through this lesson. This is a sealed ecosystem that has only been watered once, but has been able to thrive for 50 years. How is that even possible? That's what I want you to keep in the back of your mind today. Just a quick review for you. An ecosystem is all the living organisms in a given area, as well as the abiotic factors with which they interact. All of the organisms living on Earth need energy to carry out life processes such as growth, movement, and reproduction. This energy starts with the sun. Now, producers, or autotrophs, rely on the sun's energy, water, and carbon dioxide to create glucose and oxygen through the process of photosynthesis. Consumers, which are heterotrophs, use that oxygen and glucose and place carbon dioxide and water back into the atmosphere. So energy enters an ecosystem in the form of sunlight and exits the ecosystem in the form of heat. This energy cannot be recycled. So energy flows through an ecosystem from the sun to the producers, to the consumers, to the decomposers. And once again, here we have our energy pyramid. So remember, this energy cannot, I repeat, cannot be recycled. Now, energy is very crucial to an ecosystem, but organisms need more than just the energy to survive. So the organisms in the ecosystem also need nutrients from water, minerals, and other compounds. So for most organisms, more than 95% of the body is made up of only 4 elements, and that's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So there is an abundant supply of these elements on Earth, but they must be in a form that living cells can absorb and use, or else if we can't absorb and use it, there's no point in them being here. Now, energy and matter move through an ecosystem in very different ways. Energy cannot be recycled. Matter can be recycled between ecosystems. So elements and compounds are recycled in biogeochemical cycles. A biogeochemical cycle is the process in which elements, chemical compounds, and other forms of matter are passed from one organism to another, from one part of the biosphere to another. So we have the water cycle, the carbon cycle, the nitrogen cycle, and the phosphorus cycle. Those are the 4 cycles we're going to talk about in ecosystem recycling today. As we all know, water is crucial to life, from the biosphere all the way down to the cell. Now, at any given time, the water of Earth can be found in the following places: in bodies of water, such as oceans, lakes, rivers, etc. It's stored in the bodies of living organisms. It's stored in the atmosphere as clouds and water vapor. And it's stored in underground formations of groundwater. So the movement of water between these various reservoirs is known as the water cycle. Now, how is water going to move through the water cycle? So there are 5 processes that account for the movement of water molecules through an ecosystem. We have evaporation, precipitation, transpiration, condensation, and infiltration. Don't worry, I know that's a lot of big words, but we're going to talk about it. So, here is the water cycle in a nutshell. And it truly does not matter where you begin because it just leads in a giant circle, basically. So, precipitation, for example, this is the rain that's falling from the sky to the ground. Rain is precipitation. So, the precipitation is going to either go into the ground through infiltration. Infiltration is sucking in the water into the ground, kind of like how a sponge sucks in water. Or the water is going to run off into a bigger body of water. Now, the water can't just stay down here, or else water would never get up into the sky. So that's where evaporation comes in. The sun uses heat to cause the water to steam. Just like if you're boiling a pot on the stove and you see the steam rising, that water vapor is going to evaporate and move up into the sky. And the water in the sky is what's going to be our condensation, which in turn becomes precipitation, which is falling down to earth. And this cycle just continues and continues and continues. Next, we have the carbon cycle. So carbon is the key element of all organic compounds. So think about your macromolecules. All of the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids that compose all living things contain atoms of carbon in one way or another. So, in order to build new organic compounds for living cells, there must be a constant and steady supply of available carbon. So, photosynthesis removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now, cellular respiration and decomposition releases carbon dioxide. So, photosynthesis and cellular respiration form the basis of the carbon cycle. Carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere by plants and used to build molecules of glucose through photosynthesis. Now, cellular respiration, which is used by animals, plants, fungi, and protists, it returns the carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. So in turn, the cycle once again begins all over again. So there are other ways that carbon can move through an ecosystem. For example, we have geochemical processes such as erosion and volcanic activity. This releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and the oceans. Some more biogeochemical processes cause the dead organisms to decay under pressure, and their bodies are then converted into fossil fuels, and this stores carbon underground. Now, in human activities such as mining, cutting, and burning forests, and burning fossil fuels, this releases the carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So here is a nice little picture of the carbon cycle for us. So you can see, if you just follow the arrows, everything is leading back to the atmosphere. It's all leading back up here. Then through diffusion, we're moving stuff around. So in the atmosphere, carbon is present in the form of carbon dioxide, which is up here in the sky. So this carbon dioxide is released to the atmosphere by cellular respiration, volcanic activity, the burning of fossil fuels, and by the decomposition of organic matter. So we have all of these players in here. All of these things are going to release that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. But the plants are going to take in the carbon dioxide and use it during photosynthesis to build the molecules of glucose. That's how that cycle continues. Everything is going to be pushed off into the atmosphere, but the plants are going to reel it back in and able to produce photosynthesis. So the glucose molecules and other carbohydrates are then going to be used by the consumers, which is our little horsey down here. Our little horsey is going to go over to the tree and they're going to eat some leaves or they're going to eat some grass. They're then going to produce waste, and the waste is then going to give off carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Next, we have the nitrogen cycle. All organisms must have nitrogen in order to build proteins and nucleic acids. So nitrogen is found in ammonia, the bodies of dead plants and animals, and in the waste, both urine and feces, of all living organisms. Nitrogen gas makes up about 78% of the Earth's atmosphere. However, most organisms do not have the ability to make sure or to make use of the atmospheric nitrogen. So, if organisms can't use the nitrogen available in the atmosphere, how do they get the nitrogen they need? So, we have that through nitrogen fixation. So, soil-dwelling bacteria and lightning are able to transform atmospheric nitrogen into a form that other living cells can use. These bacteria will take the nitrogen from the air and they convert it into nitrates. So the nitrates are then absorbed by the roots of the plants, and then the nitrogen is going to be passed up the food chain. So we're going to go from the atmosphere, the bacteria and the soil and the roots is going to soak up all that nitrogen gas, and that's going to produce our ammonia, which is going to be passed up the food chain. We also have denitrification, which is the opposite of nitrogen fixation. The conversion of nitrates to nitrogen gas. So this nitrogen gas is released into the atmosphere. So it's literally the reverse. We start out with our nitrites or our nitrates. They're then going to be put into the soil, which is released back into the atmosphere as nitrogen gas. We also have ammonification, which is the production of ammonia by bacteria during the decay of nitrogen containing organic matter. So soil bacteria converts waste products, which is decaying organic matter, feces, urine. It produces all of that and converts it into ammonia. So here we got our plants and our animals. When they decompose, that's working its way into the soil, and ammonification occurs when that ammonium is generated. We also have nitrification. This is the production of nitrates from ammonia. So some of the ammonia in the soil is converted by several kinds of bacteria to nitrates. So these nitrates are then absorbed from the soil by the plants. So we have our ammonium starting out, we have our soil bacteria, and then that's going to turn into our nitrites and our nitrates. Okay, so here we have assimilation. So this is the absorption and incorporation of nitrogen into the plant and animal compounds. Ammonia and nitrates are picked up by the plants. The plants use the ammonia and nitrates to build proteins and nucleic acids. So when animals eat those plants, they use the nitrogen to build their own proteins and their own nucleic acids. So assimilation is just an entire process of absorption. So here, this picture gives a good indication of it. So we got our little blue fishy up here. Isn't he cute? Well, blue fishy, he's going to excrete waste, such as urine or feces. So down here, it's going to turn into our bacteria to turn ammonia into nitrates. So these nitrates are going to turn into nitrites. It's going to go through the plant uptake, and it's going to turn into plant matter. And in turn, blue fishy is going to eat the plant, and the whole cycle is going to start all over again. Finally, we have the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is essential for all living organisms because it is needed to build molecules of ATP and the nucleotides that compose DNA and RNA. Now, although phosphorus is of great biological importance, it is not very common in the biosphere. So unlike the other essential elements, they are recycled, such as our carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen. Phosphorus does not enter the atmosphere. Phosphates are usually present in rocks and soil as calcium phosphate. So calcium phosphate dissolves in the water to form inorganic phosphate ions. As phosphates are released from the soil and rocks, it washes into the streams and rivers, and that eventually makes its way to the ocean where it's used by marine organisms. So some phosphates will remain on land and cycle between organisms and the soil. When plants absorb phosphates from the soil or from the water, they bind the phosphate into organic compounds. So the phosphate moves through the food chain from the producers to the consumers. And here is an excellent picture of our phosphorus cycle. So you can see that it can cycle through our ecosystem in many different ways depending on where the phosphorus goes. We have our water cycle, our water version of the phosphorus cycle, and then we have with our primary consumers and our secondary consumers here. But humans have had a massive impact on our biogeochemical cycles. Human activities have greatly increased carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere and nitrogen levels in the biosphere. So these altered biogeochemical cycles combined with climate change threaten biodiversity, food security, human health, and water quality, making them increasingly vulnerable to disruption in a changing climate. Now, our industrial society depends on the energy that comes from the burning of fossil fuels such as oil, coal, and natural gas. But the burning of these fossil fuels actually increases the amount of carbon dioxide entering the atmosphere. Deforestation is a decrease in trees, which means an increase in the CO2 that's going to be taken out of the atmosphere. So the burning of fossil fuels using fertilizers and other activities can dramatically increase the amount of biologically available nitrogen and phosphorus in an ecosystem. Nitrogen and phosphorus availability often limits the primary productivity of many ecosystems and can actually lead to several alterations of the nitrogen cycle, the phosphorus cycle, in both aquatic and terrestrial ecosystems. So one common consequence of increased nitrogen is an increase in harmful algae blooms. Eutrophication. So toxic blooms of certain types of dinoflagellants have been associated with high fish and shellfish mortality in some areas. Now, back to our anchoring phenomena. This is the sealed ecosystem that's only been watered once, but has been able to thrive for 50 years. Using your current knowledge, how is this possible?